Good afternoon and welcome to the Way to Wow. My name is Leah Siegel. I'm the host of our show today, and I'm actually here with our producer, Rabbi Kevin Bemel, and he is going to be our guest speaker today. I'm so excited. Before we get into that, if you missed last week, we had Brenda Kramer on with us, helping individuals understand the ins and outs of student loans, the different options that exist with repayment and forgiveness programs. So make sure you go to the Way to Wow YouTube channel, check that out. It's going to be very eye-opening. Today, we have a very special guest, someone who's very near and dear to me, who gave me this platform. I had the honor of being on his show last year, maybe a year and a half ago, and we had some real great conversations. And today we're going to focus on rebuilding and coming out of perhaps a setback that life might throw at us, right? We all go through life's journey, and sometimes things happen that we didn't plan for. They come in all forms, all shapes and sizes, right? And today we're going to focus on getting back to where we want to be. In fact, I would even say becoming something better than we even thought was possible. And, it starts with, you can be prepared for certain things that you didn't see them coming, but what if you knew there were things and steps of action you can take so that you don't have to face it in a really frustrating and a way that could be a struggle? So let me first tell you a little bit about who we have here with us today. Rabbi Kevin Bemel lives in Los Angeles. He actually had a 20-year career owning a commercial real estate company. He pivoted over and became a chaplain in the Navy. And he has been all over the world. He's been in Japan. He has times left his family for even 7 months at a time, which is really challenging when you have a child. We'll get to hear more about that. And what leads us to this is there's been some changes in his life that he now knows he can help others avoid some of the landmines, so to speak, that he came across, right? He has some great stories on how he became a coach and how he helps people transition from the military into civilian life, specifically finding the career path that speaks to them. And I love learning from you and hearing from you. You're famous for many things, especially helping people find their calling. And the way in which you do it is very unique. I'm sorry we're not in the same room. Last time we were, you made an exquisite cocktail for me. you had actually a professional drink maker mix that for us, and that was really nice. And I got to be in your home and really get to know your family. And now we're going to talk about a couple things that are going to help those who go into some life changes, right? And they could be unexpected. It could look like a death. It could look like a divorce. It could look like job interruption. It could be many different things. So let's talk about, what would you say are some most commonly frequently made mistakes that people can make when they have a setback coming their way?
Yeah. And so first of all, Leah, thank you so much for having you on the show. I mean, I never intended to be a guest.
I know, I made you do this.
This will be interesting for me. I was thinking about this yesterday as I was doing my show. The tables are turned now, so this is really interesting. I kind of get to know what my guests feel like, I think, which is good. So we know these things, but I think until we experience them, sometimes they don't resonate nearly as deeply as they ought to. So I'm going through a time of transition in my life. In some ways, this transition has been going on for 4 years. So towards the end of 2017, I went on what turned out to be my last active duty time in the Navy. I was sent to Germany without my family. And unfortunately, things didn't work out very well. Although I feel compelled to say, because people always go, oh, Jewish guy in Germany, of course they didn't work out well. The German people were absolutely fantastic. They were lovely people, extremely supportive, extremely respectful. And I got into an automobile accident one time on, of all things, Christmas Eve, taking some of my sailors to the evening Catholic mass. And the accident was clearly my fault. And the German police show up. It was a man and a woman, and they come walking up to me, and the woman says, what, we're here to investigate. And I turn to the man, he says, no sprechen Sie English, I'm like, oh great, and he's tall and Nordic looking, the whole thing. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm in for trouble here, right? And to make a long story short, after they finished the investigation, the way it works in Germany is they adjudicate the case right then and there. So the female officer comes up to me, she says, we've determined that the accident was your fault. I'm like, okay, wow. Yeah, that's the case, right? She says, is that okay? I'm like,
is that okay? No.
Yes. She says, I've decided to fine you 16 euro. So I thought I heard her wrong. I said, you mean 60 euro, which would be about $70. She said, no, 16 euro, which is about $17. I'm thinking to myself, She says, will that be all right? I said, yeah, And then she says,
what was the thought process behind that dollar amount?
I don't know. Wait, here's the kicker. She says to me, I've decided to waive the fine.
I can't.
Right? I was like, she said, will that be okay? I said, absolutely, sure. The male officer comes up to me in perfect English, says to me, is it true you're a Jewish rabbi? He says, I've never met a rabbi before. It's an honor, sir. And he puts out his hand to shake my hand. I
got chills just now.
Yeah, right. What I found out subsequently was they were, people don't understand what they haven't experienced. So the idea that a Jewish chaplain was taking Roman Catholics to church to celebrate Christmas Mass, it completely changed their worldview in a way.
Sure. The respect you just gained was tremendous.
Yeah, right. So like I said, the German people were great. It was unfortunately the Americans I had to deal with that weren't. So in 2018, I get back from active duty. And then there were a couple of deaths in the family. So I was, although not actually out of the Navy, I was done with my Navy career at the end of 2018, which had been my whole professional identity for the last, at that point, whatever it was, 14 years.
Wow.
And then important people in my life pass away. And then there's COVID, and then, more sort of, personal life turmoil after that. And so over the last 4 years, I've had a number of, I don't want to sound, inflammatory, but sort of almost like assaults on my identity, right? Because we look at ourselves a certain way. And when life doesn't shape up to our self-image, I think that's when we really start to struggle. So
that's really a powerful point you just made right there.
Yeah. So, I'm here. Here I was sort of sitting in the midst of COVID at the time. And a friend of mine has an organization called C-Suite Networks, and he'd been talking to me over the previous couple of years about doing something with him. And I just didn't know what, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, what I calling Kevin 3.0, right? Kevin 1.0, real estate, commercial real estate, 2.0, Navy chaplain, right? And now I'm not going to be a Navy chaplain anymore. I'm not going to go back to 1.0. That's, so last, version, right? And so now I've got to figure out, well, what am I going to be now, right? And so my friend Jeffrey Hazlett, I ended up doing a very intensive session with him and his partner. And I had mentioned to them that while I was in the Navy, I had developed a resiliency program for my sailors and Marines that I called the 3 Pillars of Fitness. And they came up with the idea of sort of reworking it for civilian consumption. And that from there, that blossomed into doing a weekly, really a weekly talk show. So If people were to go to our YouTube channel, they could see the first 2 seasons of the show, including the episode we did together, which you are so great on that episode, I have to say.
Thank you.
We did a very highly produced show, very different than what we're doing now. And the show, I ended up naming the show the Way to Wow Show. So the graphic in the back here may be a little bit hard to see. So I was talking to someone, they say, way to wow, like, life isn't always wow. And it's not that kind of wow. It's not like, wow, fireworks, boom, boom, bang, bang, big colors. Way to wow is figuring out who are you and what you want. When I was growing up as a young boy, I pretty much knew how my life was going to work. I was going to graduate high school. I was going to go to college. I was going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant, or in my case, an architect. That was, acceptable, in a Jewish family. I was going to get married. I was going to have 2.4 kids and a dog and live in the suburbs, right? And the reality was almost none of that came true. I mean, I did graduate from college, fortunately for the urban environment, I never became an architect, because the things I would have designed would have absolutely, horrified people.
That's great.
And so now we have no guidelines, and so we have to figure all this out. And the challenge then is, when we get hit with those big setbacks in life, a death in the family, a loss of a job, a divorce, whatever they are, they have a much greater impact on our self-image, because society isn't sort of holding us up like this the way it used to. And we could have a philosophical discussion about, well, whether was this better than, this? And that's a separate issue. We have to deal with the fact that the world is this now. When a parent says to a child, you can pretty much be anything you want, aside from, someone like me, 5'8", being, in the NBA, which is never going to happen, no matter how good a basketball player I am, right? A lot of that is actually pretty true. I mean, if she really wanted to, my daughter could probably grow up to be, president of the United States,
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's certainly, she's, almost 15. It's well within her, it's well within the realm of possibility. Right. But with that greater freedom comes greater responsibility to ourselves. And so now each one of us has to answer, who are you? What do you want? So people tend not to ask themselves those questions in advance. And so then when the crunch comes, they can't answer those questions, and they keep trying to push through life when they're not even sure where they're going. So to get back to your original question, I think the biggest mistake people make is not having figured out some of life's foundational issues while life is reasonably calm. Right. And then they get into the crisis, and they try to push through with even more of their foundation knocked out from under them. So I think at that point, we need to take even a further step back and say, maybe this is a sign that I really need to take a wider view of my life. Where am I? Who am I? What do I really want? And then start moving forward after we figure those out.
Very important. And I know the world, self-care is important. And I know you've mentioned that before. And that's different for everybody, right? My self-care might look different than yours. What would you say are some common self-cares that people can take? And then if you don't mind to share what you do personally for some self-care in that department.
So it's funny. I was just having this conversation with one of my business coaches earlier this morning. and we were debating what is self-care, right? So I think there are three fundamental parts of self-care that we all share. One is getting enough sleep. And especially when we're in crisis, that can almost take our entire day, in the sense that if our day is filled with anxiety, depression, all those kind of things, they're all going to impact our sleep. So how do we manage our day so that at least we can get a good night's sleep? The second thing is eating properly. So our body starts craving all kinds of things that satisfy us in the moment, but long term, and long term can even be, the next day to the next week, the next month, aren't really going to help us get through this. Whether it's, eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs, nothing against Haagen-Dazs, it's great. But I mean, eating a pint a day, probably not a good diet, right?
Yeah.
Drinking too much, these kind of things, they satisfy us in the moment. But as we move forward and try and deal with the various issues we need to deal with, they're eventually going to hold us back. Okay, so that's number two. And number three is getting exercise. Probably, look, I'm not a nutritionist or any of these kind of things, but I can tell you from my time in the military, the sailors and the Marines who did the best under stressful situations were the ones who routinely got exercise. Even if it was just like when we were deployed, we'd go up on the deck of the carrier when there weren't flight operations going on, and we'd walk back and forth across the deck 1,000 feet each direction.
Wow.
Or we do it in the hangar deck, and we duck when when there was a prop coming over our head or something like that, right? Or we'd go to what was called the outboard gym. I used to go there virtually every day. I'd get on one of the treadmill, or not the elliptical machines, and we had a view of the ocean, and sometimes the dolphins would come and play in the wake of the ship while we're up. Like,
nice,
right? So those three things I think are common for all of us.
Love that.
When it comes to sleep, that is my Achilles heel. So I work with a sleep specialist, a fantastic guy. His name Dr. Michael Bruce. I did an episode with him on my show as well. He's called the Sleep Doctor, I think, the sleepdoctor.com, I want to say. But if you look up Michael Bruce, Breus, Michael is one of 185 people in the world who have the level of credentials and expertise in sleep that he has. So he's creme de la creme. He's got an enormous amount of material on his website to help you, to help anyone who's having trouble with sleeping. So, Michael is such a, this term, menschlich, such a, nice guy, right? So he's consulted with me, kind of pro bono, because I was in the military. And he has, over the last several years, really, gotten my sleep 1,000 times better,
I definitely want to learn more about that. It's so interesting that you mentioned sleep, because, we all make jokes when you're around someone who's in a bad mood. We're like, you need a nap, or did you not sleep last night? It's like the first thing we say. We don't say to them, did you skip the gym today? Right? Or did you eat a hamburger? We say, you need a nap, right? So I'm dying to know more about that. I tend to go to sleep late, or even if I get into bed early, could take a while to go to sleep because everything's racing in my mind. That my son-in-law gave me this amazing book. I did it on Audible. Turns out my other daughter across the world in Israel read it, not knowing I did, called Why We Sleep, by Dr. Matthew Walker.
Okay.
And I think I want to know more about your stuff, and I'll give this as a recommendation because it just taught me so much about the sleeping, the rhythms, the patterns, why one shouldn't rely on all these, what melatonin really does, and these sleeping aids, right? So important. I had no idea you were going to talk about that today.
Oh,
because Self-care could be like, I'm going to get a massage, but you're talking about some basic fundamentals that as human beings, whether or not, you like massages and spas but we all need to eat better. We all need to sleep better. We all need to move around.
Yeah. So I think, this is what I've learned over the last several years. Good sleep is the foundational element to a life well lived, is how it used to be spoken about, when I was a young guy. So what does that mean? For the typical adult, that means at least 7 hours of actually being asleep, not 7 hours in bed, so you sleep 6 hours, but 7 hours of actual sleep. So I know for me, that means I've got to be lying in bed in a sleep mode for typically at least 7 3/4 to 8 hours, because I move around a lot when I sleep. I'm not a good sleeper. So that's one thing. The second thing is sleep hygiene is enormously important. So we're much better off sleeping in a cool room, because that's telling our body go to sleep. If we're in a warm room, it's telling our body, hey, wake up, go party, or whatever you're going to do, right?
Interesting.
We
Wow.
shouldn't, watch television at least, or do computers, anything with a screen, for at least 30 minutes before we go to sleep. Shouldn't drink, liquids probably for 30 to 60 minutes, because then we're, our body's might wake us up in the middle of the night. A lot of people sleep with dogs. I did until several months ago, and now the dog I slept with years ago would snuggle into me, go to sleep, and not move the whole night, and so he helped my sleep. The dog I had more recently, she was bigger and moved around a lot, and she'd wake up at 2, 3 in the morning. Sometimes she'd jump off the bed, come running back on. It's like, so she would wake me up. So, you have these challenges. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that people should get rid of their dogs. I'm not saying that at all. Please, all you dog owners out there, I love dogs. But, these are things to take into account. And Dr. Bruce talks about understanding your chronotype. So I'm not going to get into that, because I'm not an expert, but really what it says is, when are we different people have different chronotypes, which means that they're better off sleeping at different times of the day. So whatever our chronotype is, we really need to set a sleep schedule and stick with it as much as possible. So, my Apple Watch tells me, get ready to go to sleep at 9:30, so that at 10 o'clock, I'm in bed. And hopefully within 4 to 7 minutes, I'm asleep. And at 6 o'clock, my alarm goes off and I'm getting out of bed. That's my sleep schedule. And, rarely do I deviate from it. And that has made a huge difference in my sleep. And I will say, I have an Oura ring, and it is fantastic for tracking your sleep. So each morning I can get up and I can see, how well did I do? For someone who like me, who's really into, did I get an A, teacher?
I love it. Exactly.
Like, last night I didn't get an A in sleeping, but 3 nights before I did. So, but it really gives you a lot of information that's useful to know, and you can really see how the things you do impact how well you sleep.
Wow. And this is stuff that everyone needs to be doing, regardless if you're going through a setback, right? This is normal life, right? And going back to setbacks and curveballs, right? We want to move on, right? We're doing the self-care. What are some steps that one can take to rebuild? But before we go to rebuilding, I think we need to talk about what was, and I don't want to use the word destroyed, God forbid. It could be very, it's a powerful word, but when something is taken apart, right? And we have to rebuild it. What are some of those things that you've experienced, others have experienced, because you talk to, a lot of people, you have a huge network of close friends and colleagues. So there are things that have majorly shifted. So what are some of those things, and how do we take a baby step to rebuild?
So I think the first thing, and you were kind of searching for a way to describe them. I tend to think of these things as losses.
Okay.
So whether it's somebody who's died, whether it's getting fired or laid off, all of these things, they're losses. They may be physical losses. If we get divorced, we're physically now separated from our spouse. And even if we, even for someone who hates their spouse, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of people who've gotten divorced, and it's not uncommon at all for, for example, a woman who's, she was the one who divorced her husband, so she was the one who initiated it, and yet she misses him. She misses because she feels alone, right? So there's a loss there, no matter who may have been, even if there was an initiator, to the overall loss, right? So I think the first thing we need to do is come to terms with what that loss means in our life. And there's a whole thing about bargaining and negotiating and that whole thing, which is probably it's not nearly as accurate as it's thought to be, but we do need to go through a grieving process of some kind.
Yeah, I hear the word mourning kind of comes to my mind. When I hear loss, I think of mourning.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example from when I was deployed. I was an air wing chaplain, and we were deployed, and it just so happened that right after our ship left port, the earthquake and tsunami and reactor meltdown in Japan, and I believe it was 2011, happened. And so the United States decided to send assets to help with the relief efforts, and so our ship was tasked to go help, right? And so we sailed across the Pacific Ocean on our own, right? People are like, wait, carriers don't go by themselves. It's like, well, actually, the carrier protects all the other ships these days, because we have these things called jet airplanes, and they can fly off and shoot other boats. So we get on the scene, and we're in the ocean, okay? So we're not on the land, but there are pieces of houses floating by our ship.
Mm.
So now try and create this atmosphere a little bit. It's a nuclear aircraft carrier. There's about 4,200 people on the boat.
Did you say 4,200?
4,200. Okay.
Wow.
About 90% of them are in their mid-20s or younger. So what we've got is an enormous floating college dormitory.
I was going to say, these are people's babies, people's little children.
Right? And this is not to say that many of them haven't been through traumatic things in their lives. Of course they have been. In many cases, that's what motivated them to join the military. A very credible, really admirable thing for them to do. And yet, the idea of seeing houses float by your ship is not something that most people ever experience, especially because you're pretty sure the houses aren't empty, right? So I was sitting in my office one day, and a sailor comes up to my door, knocks on the door jamb. Hey, Rabs, can I speak to you, please? It's like, but it's always a temptation to go, no, get out of here, So I say, no, come on in, shipmate, have a seat. Do you want the door closed? Close the door. I said, so what's on your mind? He says, and he's almost crying. And he's probably, early 20s. He's what they call an Airedale. He works on the flight deck of the ship. I think he was a fuel guy, so he was, fueling jets. And he says, I feel awful and I cannot figure out why. And I said, well, what's been going on? And he said, just, doing my job there on the deck of the ship. And I'm like, well, kind of take me back in time a little bit. Does this remind you of anything? He says, well, it's a little bit like my last deployment. I said, what happened on that? He said, not a lot, really. Oh yeah, partway through the deployment, my grandmother died, and they flew me off the ship to go to her funeral. And he said, I get to her funeral, and my mother is devastated, and my family is devastated. So I've got to arrange the funeral, and I
Oh
had to
my
take care of my
goodness.
family. And make a long story short, by the time he's flown back to the ship, he's done no mourning of his own.
Mm.
And his grandmother effectively raised him. So he was actually attending the funeral of his mother, and
This
he
poor
had
kid.
that moment grieved for her loss.
Wow.
So I said to him, do you think maybe now that we're surrounded by death in some ways, it's bringing up feelings that you haven't resolved? He looks at me and he goes, yeah.
Wow.
So I didn't say it to him this way. You'll appreciate this because you're Jewish. So I said to him, my friend, you need to sit Shiva. Now, this is a Jewish practice where for about a week after someone important in our life dies, we basically just focus on grieving to start the process of coming to terms with the pain, getting it out. And so, as much as I wanted to say to him, I'm going to go talk to your chief and say, you got to give this sailor a week to just sit in his room and grieve.
Right.
That's not going to happen. So, but we worked it out. And over the next, month or so, he would take an hour or two a day as he could grab it and just go
Wow.
someplace alone where he could think about her. He journaled about her, journaled about life. And that's how we got through it. So those kinds of things are relevant. Maybe losing a job isn't as, devastating as losing a loved one, but it can still be very, very devastating. In the United States, so much of our identity is tied into what we do. And when you meet someone at a, even socially, well, what do you do? That's what you say in the United States. In Europe, they ask you, who are you?
That's interesting.
Because they have a different perspective than we.
Different perspective.
Right? So that's what we do. At first is grieve before we start the rebuilding process. Otherwise, like that sailor, we're rebuilding, but there's sand underneath us. And so then when something else happens that, I would argue as horrible as being in the ocean was at that time it was nothing like losing your mother. Right. But it hit him for such a whammy because he was already on shaky ground that he didn't realize.
Had he not had you, Kevin, I feel like his work on the ship could have been completely disrupted and he would have been of no good, no service, had a breakdown without even knowing what's at the core of it. And not only did you help him mourn his grandmother, you helped him be the best he could be for the Navy. I feel like there's such an important role you played that it's not just one thing, it's many layers and they're all connected. And we don't realize that for someone who, let's say does lose a job, it can be just as great as a loss if that job was their entire life. Mm-hmm. Like you said, your identity is wrapped up in what you do. And especially, let's say someone's family situation is not the stronger point in their world, but their work is. And at work, they're held to a higher esteem or something like that, where that comes crumbling. It's the biggest blow. And I have, you've heard stories, we've all heard stories of suicides that are related to that, income, titles, Absolutely. Even market loss. So it's loss is loss, and how we deal with it is so important. So now that we understand we've got to grieve first, then we can think about rebuilding. Talk to us a little bit more about some of the baby steps that people can take in rebuilding. Right. How does one even start? How do you plan that? There's so many layers. There's like you talk about purpose, you talk about mission. One thing a therapist told me years ago was that at the end of the day, you're alone. Even if you're in a marriage, even if you have a large family, you are alone, and we need to be okay being alone. So now someone goes through a divorce. So Talk to us about some rebuilding there.
And before I do that, a thought came to me. One of the other big life shifting events is retirement. We all tend to think of retirement as being very positive. It's like, I don't have to work anymore. I'm free. I can tell you, for a lot of people who retire, whether it's from the civilian workforce or especially from the military, especially if they were either a very senior enlisted person or a high-ranking officer, they go from being able to say jump and a bunch of people go yes sir, to nobody listens to them at all. So it's anything that disrupts us in that way can cause us to have to can necessitate our having to re-examine our identity. So you hit I think on what I consider to be the two main aspects of our identity: purpose and mission. Now, a lot of people define them in various ways. I have very specific ways that I define purpose. And actually, if you, I'm going to go ahead and share.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you have anything you want to show everyone, let's do it.
So this is the civilian version, if you will, of the 3 pillars of fitness. It's now called the 3 pillars of attainment. You can see that in the center there. It's a little bit dark. So you can see on one side, you've got purpose, and on the other side, you have mission. And here at the top is self. So the 3 pillars are self, relationships, and pursuits, right? And if we think of self as being, certainly it's our identity. Included in that is our health and our mindset. Those are all internal to ourselves, right? So then as we move out of ourselves, which hopefully we do, as as a child, this is kind of where we live.
Right, it's all we know.
It's what we know. And then we branch out into some play maybe, and family, and then eventually friends, or maybe, we go to church or synagogue, whatever, God, we branch out into relationships. Eventually we go to school, and then eventually, we go to work. That's sort of the progression through life. What those things entail is, on the one side, interacting with people, and on the other side, pursuing certain pursuits, going after certain pursuits. To my mind, that's the difference between purpose and mission. So our purpose is, how do we relate to other people? So if you were to look at my statement of purpose, you would see I'm what's called an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. I'm a father to my daughter. I'm an athlete. Not that I have dreams of glory. I'm an athlete because I exercise 6 days a week. So those different aspects are from how I interact with other people, right? My mission then is what I'm going to do to have impact on the world, hopefully positive impact. So be an effective businessman, help people to live better lives through understanding better who they are and what they want, right? That's my mission in life. And then I go after that through my pursuits, right? So as we start to come out of a loss, I think the first thing we need to do is focus on self. That's our health and our mindset, which underpin our identity. And then as we get more solid in our self, then we need to start moving back into our purpose and back into our mission through engaging with other people and through engaging in pursuits. That's what I would call sort of the roadmap to recovery from loss. Now,
Wow.
Of course, I'm not saying that, you become a monk until you're, part of recovering our identity is going to hopefully involve reconnecting with family, friends, and for people who believe in God, God. And it's also going to involve re-engaging in our pursuits, right? But we do that, and this is, I think, what is difficult for a lot of people. I know this was one of the big things I had to overcome, is relying on family and friends felt very selfish, because
Tell me more about that.
I needed these relationships to support me. And I'd always been on the other side, right? As a chaplain, people come to me, chaplain, my life, I'm having difficulty in my life, help me. Oh, no problem, I got you, shipmate, or shipmate's wife, husband, child. I'm there, sort of. I'm under here, holding this up, right? That's my identity, was I'm the guy who helps, right? And then all of a sudden the tables are turned, and I'm the guy who needs help. But I can't need help because that's not who I am.
So it seems like it not just humbled you, it made you human. Because we all need each other.
Right. Right. It certainly made me much more empathetic for, other people. Hopefully I was sufficiently empathetic as a chaplain to really help people. I mean, I think so. I don't know for sure. You never know.
Something tells me yes.
Thank you. But certainly going through, a loss, multiple losses really, has made me much better at being empathetic and understanding that when I approach someone to help them, they could be just as reluctant as I am to accept the help, because they don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to feel an obligation, all these things that we sometimes feel. And so one of the things I've learned is, as I started to re-engage with friends and family, being willing to share the feelings around my loss gave other people almost like permission to share similar things with me.
Wow.
And in doing so, these relationships got much, much stronger, because we could talk about much more personal issues and strengthen, deepen those bonds.
Right. Suddenly you're relatable. Nobody wants to feel like, oh, you're going to help me, but you don't know how I feel. You haven't been in my shoes.
Right.
And then we can say, it's kind of similar when I help people. I can say, I've been where you are. I've been completely in debt, zero saved, not in the know about finance. And then suddenly now I'm debt free, have abundance of savings, and so that gives hope for someone to be like, okay, they can show me because I feel I can trust them now.
Right. And this is something I actually learned very early on in my chaplain career. So I had a young woman come into my office.
I'm going to let a guest in.
Okay, sure. So this was maybe, I don't know, I'd been there for in Japan for a couple of months, in Okinawa actually. And and she sat down and how can I help you, shipmate? She said, I used to talk to a chaplain. He really helped me out a lot, but he left. He went back to the United States. And I've been looking for a chaplain who can help me, and I haven't found one yet.
Wow.
And I said, well, tell me about it. And she told me a 7-minute life story that really was horrendous. Really horrendous. I mean, abuse and physical, emotional. I mean, and I'm trying to keep, a calm look on my face. And what I want to do is say, oh my, OMG, right?
Oh, well, your life really is that bad. I'm just kidding.
And she got done talking to me. And I said to her, this is what was, as Christians say, I love this expression. This is what was on my heart. I said to her, look, I have to be honest with you. There's almost nothing in what you've told me about your life that I can understand on a visceral level. I just haven't had things like that happen to me, things that are frankly so horrible. I said, I am absolutely willing to talk with you, help you however I can, but you have to know, I don't know what you've been through. She looked at me and she said, "You're my chaplain."
Wow.
So sometimes I think what's most important when we're in those crisis moments, in those loss periods, or helping someone who's in those periods, let's be authentic, let's be honest. One of the things I found is, look, I'm blessed to have a lot of friends. Fortunately, a lot of them don't know what I'm going through. And so they will say things to me sometimes, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is not helpful at all, right? And I have to stop myself, because while they may feel like they have relatable happenings in their life, not really. So what you were saying a minute ago, at the end of the day, we're all alone. At the end of the day, while we may have shared experiences, they're not the same. So what I've taken to doing is saying, I've kind of been through something that seems a little bit like what you've been through, that maybe I can relate to your situation, if that's true, of course, rather than saying, I understand what you're feeling, because the reality is, I don't.
But you're holding a place for them to feel safe. And what I feel they're feeling, because here's what I'm feeling as you say that, is that there's a curiosity enough in you that wants to understand me. And that alone helps me feel like you were there.
And that word curiosity is such an amazing concept. The most wonderful people I know in life are the ones who are most curious. So we talk about having an open mind, and somebody once told me, some of these people have such an open mind, everything's fallen out.
That's good.
So what I think is more important than an open mind is that we stay curious. If I'm curious, then I want to know about your experience, because it's interesting and it may impact my life. But in any event, it will be a connecting function between the two of us as you become the person who can, in essence, fulfill my curiosity. And you get my attention, and I get your attention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, and kind of as we talk about moving out of loss and taking the next step. So one of the things that I've worked to do is re-engage in my curiosity. And that's opened me up to all kinds of experiences that I for various reasons kind of cut myself off from.
Yeah, I mean, because we have, like you mentioned, recovering, and it can be very overwhelming. There's so many things that you feel have to heal at the same time. What would you say, how does one deal with the overwhelm when trying to get back to finding themselves? And what are some simple things? It's not just curious with others. I'm feeling, when you mention curiosity, it's curious about us, ourselves. Mm-hmm. Not why is this happening to me, but why is this happening for me? Right?
That simple change in perspective, I think, is definitely powerful. And it is something I'm still working on, frankly, because, it's natural to think, why is this happening to me? And by the way, that's not, sometimes we are a victim. To deny that victimhood is not productive either. In fact, hopefully no shame from my perspective. I have a psychotherapist, and I said something to him one time that would imply that, I thought everything happening in my life was my fault. And he was like shaking his feet. He's like, that is not true. Do not go down that road. Not everything that happened is your fault. And if you try and take on that burden, you will only delay your recovery. Right.
Wow.
So I think the process is one of figuring out, okay, what happened? What is my share of the responsibility in what happened?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then, so that's, so some things happened to us. They did. In the end, there's nothing we can do about that. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not within our control to do anything about that. Whoever did it to us has something in their control, but they may not care, right? So, or, if somebody dies, the person did something to us, they became a loss to us, but they're not here anymore to deal with that. So we just have to come to reconciliation. That's what the grieving process is for. The other half, though, where we have responsibility for these losses, that's where we can ask, why did this happen for me? And the basic answer is to have an opportunity to grow, right? To make changes. So
and make room for the next best thing that's headed your way.
Exactly. So I remember the first time I got fired from a job. And by the way, let me just say categorically, he should have fired me because I was trying to get him to do that.
So you did that very well.
So I was successful in getting fired, and yet it still felt horrible to get fired.
Right.
It was just, I remember when he finally said it, and he was almost crying as he fired me because he was so upset that, he had to, I wasn't gonna be worried about it. And I'm like acting all happy. And then I got home and I'm like, oh my God, I got fired. How kind of thing, right? So the reality is, getting fired was the first step in my professional growth. If I had stayed where I was job-wise, I never would have started my own business. I never would have gotten so bored with my own business that I joined the Navy and had to work in a huge organization for the first time and learn what is that really all about. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to sort of help people in a more meaningful way, perhaps, than we do in business. Although I do believe most people in business are helping other people, at least if they're successful, they must be. And so, those losses then become a springboard to something bigger. Having said that, I would encourage people watching this. Most people in the beginning part of a loss are not prepared to hear that this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you.
Right.
Very,
Too
very
soon.
to hear that. It may very well be true, although, someone dying, probably not the best thing that ever happened to them. But, losing a job, a relationship breaking up, retiring, it may be that those are the best things that happen to us. But, while the grieving process is going on, it's not helpful for people to, generally speaking, for people to be told that because they can't hear it yet.
Right. Let them be the one to say it when they're ready. This was the best thing that happened to me.
Yeah. And it's something we only know on reflection anyway.
Yeah.
So, I hope that the disruptions in my life, the losses in my life will lead to something better. But to be honest with you, I'm not 100% convinced of that yet.
Okay, we're still too soon. Right.
So that's, I try and keep an optimistic outlook, of course.
I think you're doing a great job at that. And it's certainly given you more time and space to focus on career for you, helping more people. Listen, you reached out to me and started, producing a show. That didn't happen up until that time. You got the creative juices started to flow and you started thinking about how do I help more and more and more people? Mm-hmm. Because we don't have a tremendous amount of time left, I want to kind of shift over to the financial conversation when we have to recover that way and rebuild that way. What are some things that people can do to prepare themselves when they're going through a divorce and they have to think about, oh my goodness, now our money situation's changing.
Right.
And I know that, off the camera, we've had some pretty intense conversations around that. And, you and I have both been through a divorce and had quite a big shock when it came to what did that mean for us financially. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So, whether it's a divorce or whether it's, being fired from a job, obviously one of the key factors in getting back on our feet is getting our finances, our financial house in order. Most of us were not born with a silver spoon in our mouth. So I think, if we are already in a particular industry, on a particular professional trajectory, so it can be a much easier issue to deal with. But if we're not, so now we've got to deal with, well, what am I going to do to pull my financial house back in order? I actually did a show on this on my show. So if folks were to go to our YouTube channel, they can find the episode on discovering your unique value proposition.
Wow.
So in order to find a satisfying professional direction, shall we say, what I recommend is we look at three things. One is our knowledge, skills, and experience. Think of that as one circle. Knowledge, skills, and experience. The second thing is, what do we enjoy doing? Okay. Some people talk about it. What are you passionate to do? Unfortunately, a lot of passions don't translate into an actual career. But think about things that we like to do.
Okay.
I'm still looking, by the way, for that job where I can eat chocolate and ice cream and read and make
hike
$50 a year, right?
And get paid.
Right, and get paid, exactly. So what do we like to do? That's the second circle. The third circle is, what will people pay for me to do? Where all three of those circles overlap, it's kind of a triangle with rounded sides. That's our unique value proposition. And that's where we can find a professional direction that will pay us well and we will enjoy. And if you think about it, if you have only two of them, so if you have something you know how to do and you like to do it, but you won't get paid for it, you have a really great hobby. If you have something you know how to do and you get paid for it, you have a job you don't like. Right? And if you have something you like to do and can get paid for it, but you don't know how, you're not going to get the job. Right? So you've got to have all three elements. So as we think about rebuilding our finances, typically that means rebuilding our professional life first, whether it's a job or building a business. I recommend that people take a look at that unique value proposition. Even if they're pretty clear on what they think it is, put it down on paper. It's different once it's there, on paper in front of us where we have to look at it. You can see I have various things here on my the partition behind me. That's because I want to look at these things every day, look at them deeply, critically. And like this one, I just went through a session with my coach, and it's going to change dramatically because when I took her through it, she said, yeah, but what you're saying is not what you've got on the paper. Wow. Right? So when we have things down on paper too, we can show them to people we trust, and they can help us clarify our thinking. And then from there, we can engage in the process of rebuilding our professional life.
Love it. Wow, there's so much. I mean, I know we're running out of time, but I want to thank you. And I know that we need to have you back on this show. There's so much to learn. There's so much to go over. I think we just touched the tip of the iceberg. To be honest, I know we need to dive more into this. I also would love to share some of my thoughts on this. I mean, today was about finding out how you're doing it. And there's so much that we all can learn. If you want to know more, you want to reach out and go to the Way to Wow show, go find Rabbi Kevin Bemel on YouTube. He's interviewed so many people that are going to help you understand so many of the topics we were talking about today. And clearly you've done that. You've found your sweet spot, let's call it, where you are really good at coaching people, right? You know how to do it. You love it. You like it. You enjoy it. And you make great money doing it. That you found your sweet spot, and you bring all that experience from, having 20 years being in real estate and being a chaplain in the Navy for many, many years, being, being a dad, being a spouse, you have it all. I really feel, and having a very strong sense of self and spirituality, being that you're a rabbi, you have so much to offer. So many people can learn so much, and we're so grateful to have you on with us. And next week, we're going to have a topic that's going to be a little different because I'm not going to be the one doing the asking. I'm going to be having a substitute because we're talking about cryptocurrency. We're going to have an expert who not only knows everything you need to know about cryptocurrency. She and her husband created their own cryptocurrency, and her name is Kira, and you're going to fall in love with how she's going to turn you into a lover of the world of money that's not it's not something you can put in your pocket and buy a candy at 7-Eleven. But I'll tell you something, you need to be in the know, right? You need to be in the know. You hear all over right now, the metaverse, right? There's so much going on. And so come learn with us next Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, on everything crypto. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much, Rabbi Kevin.